Ever feel that ping of a notification hitting harder than an actual compliment from a friend? You know that rush when your phone lights up with a little red badge and suddenly your heart does this tiny skip? Yeah, that one. The one that makes you unlock your screen faster than you'd answer a call from your mom. If you're nodding along right now, welcome to the club, and trust me, it's a bigger club than you think. What if I told you that we're not just casually enjoying social media anymore? What if we've actually become addicted to validation in ways that would make a psychology textbook blush? And what if this addiction is so deeply wired into our brains that we're essentially walking around like digital junkies, constantly chasing our next fix of approval? Let me paint you a picture from my own life that might sound painfully familiar. Last Tuesday, I posted what I thought was a pretty clever photo on Instagram. You know, one of those carefully curated shots that took about 15 tries to get right. I'm talking perfect lighting, the ideal angle, a caption that struck just the right balance between witty and relatable. And then I did something that would make my teenage self cringe. I started refreshing. Every 30 seconds. Like some kind of validation vampire waiting for my next meal of hearts and thumbs up emojis. By the end of the day, I'd checked that post approximately 47 times. Not because I needed to know anything important, but because each like felt like a tiny hit of digital dopamine straight to my brain's reward center. And here's the kicker. When the likes started slowing down after a few hours, I genuinely felt deflated. As if my worth as a human being was somehow tied to how many strangers double-tapped a picture of my coffee. Now, this might sound dramatic, but bear with me because this psychology experiment we're all unknowingly participating in runs deeper than you might think. Sigmund Freud, the granddaddy of psychology himself, talked about the human psyche being driven by three fundamental forces. The id, our primal desires and impulses, the ego, our rational, reality-based thinking, and the superego, our moral compass and internalized social standards. What's fascinating is how social media has essentially hijacked this entire system. Your id craves instant gratification. It wants those likes now. Your ego tries to rationalize this behavior, telling you that engagement is important for your personal brand or that you're just staying connected with friends. Meanwhile, your superego is quietly judging every post, wondering what others think of you, desperately trying to maintain your social image. It's like having three different voices in your head, all competing for control. And social media platforms have figured out exactly how to exploit this internal psychological warfare. But here's where this what-if scenario gets really mind-blowing. Imagine for a moment a world where likes, hearts, shares, and comments simply didn't exist. Picture opening Instagram or TikTok and seeing content with absolutely zero social validation metrics. No numbers telling you how popular something is, no algorithmic rankings based on engagement, no little dopamine-triggering badges of approval. Just pure, unfiltered content consumption without the psychological manipulation of social proof. In this hypothetical world, would you still post that carefully curated selfie? Would you still spend hours crafting the perfect caption? Would you even care about sharing that sunset photo or that inspirational quote if there was no way to measure its social impact? The answer might be more revealing than you're comfortable admitting. This isn't just some casual observation about modern life. It's a full-blown mind hack that's been deployed on a global scale. Social media addiction isn't really about the platforms themselves. It's about our fundamental human need for belonging, acceptance, and social validation being weaponized by algorithms designed to keep us scrolling, posting, and engaging. We've become unwitting participants in the largest psychology experiment in human history, and most of us don't even realize we're lab rats. The really unsettling part? This validation-seeking behavior isn't just changing how we use social media, it's rewiring our brains at a neurological level. Every time we get that notification, every time someone validates our online presence, our brains are literally being trained to crave more of the same stimulus. It's classical conditioning on steroids, and we're conditioning ourselves. Think about it. When was the last time you posted something online without at least a small part of you wondering how it would be received? When did you last share a thought, a photo, or an experience purely for your own satisfaction, without any consideration of social validation? If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone, and that's exactly the point. But what if this addict? Ion is rewiring your brain in ways that go far beyond just social media use. What if the constant need for external validation is actually changing how you make decisions, how you view yourself, and how you interact with the world around you? Here's what I want you to do right now and be honest with yourself. Comment below and tell me, how many times do you check your notifications daily? Don't give me the number you think sounds reasonable. Give me the real number, the one that might make you slightly uncomfortable to admit, because understanding this pattern is the first step in recognizing just how deep this psychological rabbit hole really goes. So you've counted those notification checks, and I'm betting the number was higher than you expected, right? Don't worry, I once refreshed a single post 20 times in 1 hour. Talk about ego on steroids. But here's where things get really fascinating, because what you just experienced counting those checks isn't just embarrassing social media behavior. It's your brain on validation, and the science behind it is absolutely mind-blowing. Let's dive deep into why validation feels exactly like a drug, because spoiler alert, it literally is one. Your brain doesn't distinguish between the rush of getting a like and the rush of, say, winning money or eating chocolate. They all trigger the same neurological pathways, flooding your system with dopamine, that feel-good chemical that's basically your brain's way of saying, do that again. UCLA's Matthew Lieberman, a brilliant researcher who spent years studying social reward circuits in the human brain, discovered something incredible through his neuroimaging studies. When people receive social validation, whether it's a compliment, a like, or even just someone remembering their name, the same brain regions light up that activate when we experience physical pleasure or receive monetary rewards. We're talking about the striatum, the brain's reward center, going absolutely haywire every time someone hearts your story. But here's where this psychology experiment gets even more twisted. Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman's prospect theory reveals something crucial about human nature. We feel losses much more intensely than we feel gains. In simple terms, the pain of losing $5 hurts more than the pleasure of finding $5 feels good. Now apply this to social media, and you've got a recipe for psychological chaos. Think about it, when your post gets 2 likes instead of your usual 20, that disappointment doesn't just feel like missing out on 18 likes. Your brain processes it as an actual loss, triggering stress responses and negative emotions that are disproportionately intense compared to the mild pleasure you'd get from those extra likes. It's like your mind is playing a rigged casino game where the house always wins, except the house is an algorithm designed to keep you emotionally invested. This explains why you might feel genuinely anxious when a post doesn't perform well, or why you obsessively check your phone after posting something. Your brain has learned to expect a certain level of validation, and when it doesn't get it, the withdrawal symptoms are real. We're not being dramatic here, this is legitimate neurochemistry at work. I want you to imagine a hypothetical scenario I call the validation blackout. Picture waking up tomorrow and discovering that every single social media platform has temporarily removed all metrics. No likes, no comments, no view counts, no follower numbers, nothing. Just content existing in a vacuum without any social proof whatsoever. How would you feel? Relieved? Anxious? Lost? Most people report feeling initially panicked by this thought, followed by a strange sense of freedom. Without the constant feedback loop of social validation, your brain would actually have space to process experiences differently. You might find yourself posting things you genuinely care about rather than things you think will get engagement. You might spend less time curating your online image and more time actually living your life. But here's the kicker, this isn't just theoretical anymore. Researchers have actually conducted mind experiments where they've temporarily hidden like counts on various platforms, and the results are telling. People reported feeling less anxious about their posts, spent less time on the platforms, and interestingly, engaged more meaningfully with content they genuinely found interesting rather than just popular posts. The human brain validation system we're dealing with here evolved over thousands of years to help us survive in small tribal communities. Back then, social rejection could literally mean death. Being kicked out of your tribe meant facing predators, starvation, and the elements alone. So our brains developed this incredibly sensitive social radar that constantly scans for approval and acceptance. Fast forward to today, And that same survival mechanism is being triggered hundreds of times daily by notifications, likes, and comments. Your ancient brain can't tell the difference between being rejected by your hunter-gatherer tribe and getting fewer likes on your vacation photos. The stress response is essentially identical, which is why social media rejection can feel so genuinely painful. Does this sound like your feed? That constant cycle of posting, checking, feeling either validated or disappointed, then posting again to chase that next hit of approval? If you're nodding along, go ahead and hit that like button because yes, I'm asking you to engage with the very behavior we're analyzing. Meta, right? The really wild part about this whole validation addiction is how it's hijacked our decision-making processes. When we're constantly seeking external approval, we start making choices based on what we think will get the best response rather than what we actually want or need. Your brain becomes so focused on predicting and optimizing for social rewards that it forgets to check in with your actual values and preferences. This isn't just affecting your social media behavior, it's spilling over into real life. People report choosing restaurants, clothes, experiences, and even relationships based partly on how they'll look online. The line between living your life and performing your life has become increasingly blurred, and most of us don't even realize we've crossed it. Now that we know the why, the neurological and psychological mechanisms driving this validation addiction, what if we experiment with breaking free? What if there were actually ways to rewire these deeply ingrained patterns and reclaim control over your own reward system? The question is, how do we even begin to break free when the evidence shows we're deeper in this validation addiction than most of us realize? Because the real-world research on this social media psychology phenomenon isn't just eye-opening, it's downright alarming. MIT's Sherry Turkle, one of the most respected voices in digital sociology, spent years studying how technology affects human relationships for her groundbreaking book, Alone Together. What she discovered should make every social media user pause and think. Despite being more connected than ever before, people report feeling increasingly isolated and lonely. We're experiencing what she calls digital intimacy, the illusion of closeness without the actual emotional substance of real relationships. Here's the paradox that'll mess with your head. We're craving validation from people we barely know while simultaneously becoming less capable of forming deep, meaningful connections with people who actually matter. It's like we're emotionally starving ourselves while binge-eating social media junk food. The validation we're getting feels satisfying in the moment, but it's nutritionally empty. It doesn't actually fulfill our fundamental human need for authentic connection and belonging. The American Psychological Association has been studying this mental health hack gone wrong for years now, and their findings are genuinely concerning. Research consistently shows a direct correlation between social media validation-seeking behavior and increased anxiety, depression, and decreased self-esteem. But here's the twisted part. It's not just that people with low self-esteem seek more validation online. The act of constantly seeking validation actually lowers your self-esteem over time, creating this vicious psychological cycle that's incredibly difficult to break. One particularly fascinating study tracked college students' mood and self-perception in relation to their social media engagement. Students who received more likes on their posts reported temporary mood boosts, but those same students showed decreased overall life satisfaction and increased anxiety about their social relationships over time. It's like getting a sugar rush followed by a crash, except the crash affects your fundamental sense of self-worth. Let me paint you a hypothetical that might hit a little too close to home. Imagine your boss started putting little heart reactions on your work emails. Every time you submitted a report or completed a project, you'd get that tiny dopamine hit of approval. Now imagine one day, your boss stops reacting to your emails entirely. Suddenly, you'd probably find yourself second-guessing your work quality, wondering if you'd done something wrong, maybe even working harder just to get that digital approval back. Sound familiar? That's exactly what's happening with our social media behavior, except we're doing it with strangers and acquaintances whose opinions realistically shouldn't matter to us at all. I have this friend, let's call her Sarah, who experienced what I can only describe as a like famine meltdown last month. She posted a photo that usually would get around 50 likes, but for whatever reason, it only got 12. 12. By normal human standards, having 12 people approve of something you shared should feel pretty good, right? But Sarah spent the entire evening analyzing what went wrong. Was it the timing, the caption? Had she somehow offended people? She ended up deleting the post and reposting it the next day with a different caption, desperately trying to achieve her usual validation quota. The really wild part? This behavior is becoming so normalized that we don't even recognize how bizarre it is. We're essentially outsourcing our self-worth to algorithms and strangers, and then wondering why we feel anxious and uncertain about ourselves all the time. But the research goes even deeper than individual psychology experiments. Scientists have discovered that validation addiction is actually rewiring our social structures at a fundamental level. We're starting to value relationships based on their social media potential rather than their emotional substance. People report choosing friends, romantic partners, and even career opportunities partly based on how they'll enhance their online image. This isn't just changing how we interact with social media, it's changing how we interact with reality itself. When everything becomes content, when every experience gets filtered through the lens of how will this look online, we lose the ability to be present in our own lives. We become performers in our own existence, constantly curating and optimizing instead of actually living and feeling. What's particularly fascinating from a social media psychology perspective is how this validation addiction affects different demographics. Teenagers and young adults who have essentially grown up with these platforms show the most pronounced symptoms of validation dependency, but middle-aged adults who join social media later in life often experience even more dramatic psychological impacts when their posts don't perform as expected. It's like their brains are trying to adapt to a reward system they weren't wired for. The evidence from neuroscience labs around the world consistently shows that heavy social media users develop tolerance, meaning they need increasingly more validation to achieve the same psychological satisfaction. It's textbook addiction behavior, complete with withdrawal symptoms when access is restricted and escalating usage patterns over time. Here's what I want you to do. Think about your worst validation craving moment. Maybe it was obsessively checking a post that wasn't getting enough engagement or feeling genuinely hurt when someone didn't like your content. Share that story in the comments, because recognizing these patterns in ourselves is the first step toward understanding just how deep this psychological rabbit hole goes. Armed with this knowledge about how validation addiction actually works and affects us, imagine a mind experiment where we turn the tables on validation entirely. What if instead of being controlled by our need for approval, we could act? You'll use these same psychological mechanisms to our advantage. What if we could flip this entire validation system on its head? I'm talking about a mind experiment so wild it might actually change how you see social media forever. Picture this. We're going to simulate a world where validation isn't just accidentally addictive, it's intentionally gamified to the extreme. Imagine waking up tomorrow in a society where every single interaction, every conversation, every moment of your day generates validation points that actually matter. Not just likes on your photos, but literal scores that affect your job prospects, your dating options, your access to restaurants, even your ability to get loans. Your validation rating follows you everywhere, a real-time social credit system powered by how much approval you generate from others. In this psychology what if scenario, getting 100 likes on a post doesn't just feel good, it increases your actual social standing. Restaurants give you better tables, employers consider you for promotions, potential romantic partners swipe right more often. The validation addiction we've been discussing isn't just psychological anymore, it's become the entire foundation of society. At first glance, this might seem like validation heaven, right? Everyone would be incredibly motivated to be kind, helpful, and engaging because being unlikable would literally hurt your life prospects. People would go out of their way to create positive content, to support others, to contribute meaningfully to their communities. The optimization for social approval could theoretically create a more harmonious society. But then pause and imagine this for a moment. Disaster strikes. What happens when the system becomes so important that authenticity dies completely? When every word you speak, every photo you post, every emotion you express gets filtered through, will this get me validation points? You'd stop being yourself and become a performance optimized for maximum social approval. The psychological research from Stanford's Dweck on neuroplasticity and mindset transformation becomes crucial here. Her decades of research show that our brains are incredibly adaptable. We can literally rewire our neural pathways through consistent practice and mindset shifts. In our hypothetical validation-obsessed society, people's brains would adapt to this system so completely that they'd lose the ability to form genuine opinions, make authentic choices, or even understand their own preferences apart from what generates social approval. Now here's where this mind experiment gets really dark. What about people who are naturally introverted, or who have unpopular opinions, or who simply don't photograph well? In a world where validation determines your life outcomes, these people become a social underclass through no fault of their own. The validation addiction that started as a harmless dopamine hit has now created systematic inequality based on likability algorithms. But wait, it gets worse. The people running these validation systems, the platform creators and algorithm designers, become the most powerful people in society. They can literally control social hierarchies by tweaking recommendation engines. Imagine the corruption potential when someone can boost or tank your social standing with a few lines of code. I actually tried to simulate a tiny version of this myself last year when I decided to take a completely like-free vacation. I deleted all social media apps from my phone for 2 weeks and went traveling without sharing a single photo or update. Sounds liberating, right? Wrong. I spent the first 3 days having actual withdrawal symptoms, phantom notification anxiety, compulsive reaching for my phone, and this weird sense that experiences weren't real if I couldn't share them online. By day 4, something fascinating happened. My brain started adapting. I began noticing details I normally would have missed because I was too busy framing them for Instagram. Conversations became more engaging because I wasn't mentally composing captions while people were talking. Food tasted better because I was actually eating it instead of photographing it. The neuroplasticity that Dweck researches was working in reverse. I was literally rewiring my brain away from validation dependency. But here's the cliffhanger within our simulation. What if this adaptation isn't permanent? What if the moment you re-engage with validation-based systems, all those neural pathways snap right back into place like a rubber band? The research suggests that breaking addiction patterns requires consistent, long-term practice, not just temporary breaks. Back to our hypothetical validation society, imagine being one of the few people who manages to maintain authentic self-expression despite the system's pressure. You'd be surrounded by performative relationships, algorithmic conversations, and people who have forgotten how to be genuine. You'd probably feel incredibly lonely, watching everyone around you optimize their personalities for maximum social approval while losing touch with who they actually are underneath all that performance. The really terrifying part of this mind experiment is how close we already are to this reality. Social media influence already affects job prospects, relationship opportunities, and social standing. We're just lacking the explicit systematic integration that would make validation addiction truly dangerous on a societal level. But what if, and here's where our simulation takes a hopeful turn, what if understanding these psychological mechanisms actually gives us the power to resist them? What if recognizing the validation addiction for what it is becomes the first step in developing immunity to its effects? In our hypothetical world, the people who understand the psychology behind validation systems become the ones who can navigate them without being controlled by them. They can engage strategically without losing their authentic selves. They become psychologically free in a world designed to make everyone else psychologically dependent. We've simulated the chaos, explored the extreme scenarios, and seen how validation addiction could reshape society itself. The question now becomes crucial. What if we could hack our way out of this system entirely? So what would actually happen if we managed to hack our way out of this validation addiction? Because breaking free from social media psychology patterns isn't all sunshine and digital rainbows. There are some genuinely challenging dark sides we need to talk out along with some incredible bright sides that might surprise you. Let's start with the science that gives us hope. Judson Brewer, a neuroscientist at Brown University, has been using fMRI brain imaging to study how mindfulness practices can literally rewire addiction pathways in the brain. His research shows that when people practice mindful awareness of their craving patterns, whether it's for cigarettes, alcohol, or yes, social media validation, specific brain regions associated with addictive behavior actually start to quiet down over time. What's fascinating is that the same neural circuits that light up when someone is craving their next cigarette are the ones that activate when you're desperately refreshing your phone waiting for likes. And just like other addiction recovery processes, the brain can learn to break these automatic response patterns through conscious awareness and practice. It's like teaching your brain to recognize, oh, there's that validation craving again, without immediately acting on it. But here's where things get real about this mental health hack. The withdrawal symptoms from validation addiction are no joke. I'm talking about genuine psychological discomfort that goes way beyond just missing your usual dopamine hits. It's like quitting coffee, but for your ego. You know that jittery, anxious feeling you get when you haven't had caffeine? Imagine that, but instead of craving coffee, you're craving the approval of people you've never met. I experienced this firsthand during my own social media detox experiment last year. For the first week, I felt like I was disappearing. Without the constant stream of external validation, I started questioning everything about myself. Was I interesting? Was I funny? Did I matter at all if nobody was liking or commenting on my thoughts and experiences? It sounds dramatic, but the existential crisis was genuinely intense. The dark side of breaking free from validation addiction includes this weird form of social loneliness that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. When everyone around you is still plugged into the validation matrix, sharing, liking, commenting, performing their lives online, stepping away can feel incredibly isolating. You start to feel like you're watching the world through glass, seeing everyone participate in this social ritual that you're no longer part of. What if freedom feels lonelier than chains? This question haunted me during my detox period. There were moments when I genuinely missed the artificial sense of connection that comes from social media interactions. Even shallow engagement started to feel better than no engagement at all. The validation addiction had created this illusion of social connection that, while ultimately hollow, still provided some psychological comfort. But then something remarkable happened around week 3. My brain started adapting to this new reality, and the bright sides of validation freedom began emerging. Without constantly seeking external approval, I started developing a more stable sense of self-worth. My mood became less dependent on how others responded to me and more connected to my actual experiences and accomplishments. The most surprising benefit was how much mental energy became available for other things. I hadn't realized how much cognitive bandwidth I'd been using to monitor, create, and optimize content for social approval. Suddenly, I had all this mental space for deeper thinking, more meaningful conversations, and actually experiencing moments instead of documenting them. Research from various neuroscience labs confirms this pattern. When people reduce their social media validation-seeking behavior, brain scans show increased activity in regions associated with self-reflection, creativity, and authentic emotional processing. It's like removing a layer of psychological noise that was constantly interfering with your brain's natural functioning. The freedom from validation addiction also led to more authentic relationships. Without the pressure to maintain an online image, conversations became more honest, more vulnerable, more real. I started sharing struggles and insecurities that I'd never post online, and discovered that genuine human connection is infinitely more satisfying than digital approval from strangers. But here's the paradox that makes this whole psychology experiment so complex. The people who benefit most from validation detoxes are often the ones who are most resistant to trying them. If you're deeply embedded in validation-seeking patterns, the idea of giving up that psychological safety net can feel terrifying. It's like asking someone with social anxiety to intentionally make themselves more isolated. The neuroplasticity research shows us that breaking free is possible, but it requires patience with the process. Your brain doesn't just flip a switch and suddenly stop craving external approval. It's more like gradually retraining a muscle that's been overdeveloped in one direction. Some days you'll feel strong and independent, other days you'll desperately want to check how many people viewed your story. The key insight from addiction recovery science is that awareness itself is therapeutic. Simply understanding that you're experiencing validation withdrawal, that the anxiety and loneliness are temporary symptoms of your brain readjusting, can make the process more manageable. It's not that something is wrong with you, it's that you're literally rewiring neural pathways that have been reinforced thousands of times. What's particularly encouraging is that people who successfully reduce their validation dependency report lasting improvements in self-esteem, creativity, and relationship satisfaction. The short-term discomfort of withdrawal leads to long-term psychological benefits that compound over time. Knowing these potential outcomes, both the challenging withdrawal phase and the eventual freedom that comes with breaking the validation addiction, let's arm ourselves with real mental health hacks that can make this transition actually manageable. Would you try a validation detox after hearing about both the struggles and the benefits? Thumbs up if yes, because what comes next might give you the practical tools to actually make it work. All right, so you're ready to try breaking free from this validation addiction, but you need actual tools that work in the real world, not just theory. Here's where. We get practical with some mental health hacks that are backed by solid research and designed to work with your brain's existing wiring, not against it. The first hack comes straight from Daniel Kahneman's behavioral economics playbook, nudging yourself toward better choices through environmental design. Instead of relying on willpower alone, which research consistently shows is unreliable, you're going to make validation-seeking behavior slightly more difficult and validation-free behavior slightly easier. Here's how this plays out in practice. Move your social media apps off your home screen and into a folder that requires several taps to access. It sounds almost too simple to work, but studies from MIT's behavioral lab show that adding just 2 or 3 extra steps to access addictive apps can reduce usage by up to 40%. Your brain, always looking for the path of least resistance, will often choose to do something else instead of going through the extra effort to seek validation. But here's where it gets interesting. What if you set yourself a daily validation budget? I'm talking about literally giving yourself permission to check for likes and comments, but only during specific windows of time. Research from Cal Newport's digital minimalism studies shows that people who batch their social media usage into defined periods report feeling more in control and less anxious about their online presence. Try this mind experiment. Imagine you can only check your social media notifications 3 times per day, say 9 a.m., 2 p.m., and 7 p.m. Outside of those windows, your phone goes into do not disturb mode for social apps. The first few days feel like torture, I'm not going to lie to you. But by week 2, something fascinating happens. You stop thinking about it as much. Your human brain validation circuits start to adapt to this new rhythm instead of being constantly activated. I have to share one of my epic failures that eventually became a success story. I tried to go completely cold turkey on all social media for 30 days, deleted every app, logged out of every account, the whole dramatic exit. By day 3, I was literally Googling how to check Instagram from web browser like some kind of validation addict trying to find a loophole in my own system. Complete failure, right? But here's the plot twist. That failure taught me something crucial about human psychology and habit change. Going from 100 to 0 overnight doesn't work for most people because it creates too much psychological resistance. Instead, I started with what addiction researchers call harm reduction, keeping the apps but changing how I use them. The next hack involves what neuroscientists call mindful interruption. Before you post anything, pause for 30 seconds and ask yourself, am I sharing this because I genuinely want to share it or because I want validation? This simple awareness practice, backed by mindfulness research from Harvard Medical School, creates a tiny gap between impulse and action that can completely change your relationship with social sharing. What's brilliant about this technique is that you're not forbidding yourself from seeking validation, you're just becoming conscious of when you're doing it. Sometimes you'll realize you're posting for genuine connection or creative expression. Other times you'll catch yourself red-handed in validation-seeking mode. Both outcomes are valuable because awareness is the first step toward choice. Here's another what-if scenario that might revolutionize your social media experience. What if you started engaging with content based purely on your authentic interest rather than strategic social positioning? Instead of liking posts because you want the poster to notice you or because it makes you look good, try only engaging with content that genuinely resonates with you. This sounds simple, but it's actually a profound shift in how you use these platforms. Digital minimalism research from Georgetown University shows that people who engage authentically rather than strategically report feeling more satisfied with their online interactions and less drained by social media use overall. One of the most effective hacks I've discovered involves replacing the validation-seeking behavior with something else that meets the same psychological need. When you feel the urge to post for validation, try calling or texting someone you care about instead. You're still seeking connection and approval, but from someone whose opinion actually matters to you and who can provide genuine emotional support. The key insight from behavioral psychology is that you can't just remove a habit, you have to replace it with something else. Cold turkey approaches fail because they leave a psychological void that your brain desperately wants to fill. Smart approaches give your validation-craving neural circuits something healthier to focus on. Another surprisingly effective technique involves validation tracking, simply noting when you're seeking approval and how it makes you feel afterward. Keep a tiny log on your phone. Posted photo, checked 15 times in first hour, felt anxious when likes were slow, felt briefly satisfied when they picked up, felt empty 2 hours later. Seeing these patterns written down makes them impossible to ignore and often motivates change more effectively than any external pressure. The research on habit formation shows that awareness plus gentle redirection works better than harsh restriction. You're essentially retraining your brain's reward circuits to find satisfaction in more sustainable sources of fulfillment. We've hacked the addiction by working with your brain's existing patterns rather than fighting against them. But now comes the bigger question. What if understanding and overcoming this validation addiction changes everything about how you see social media, relationships, and even yourself? Pick one of these hacks to try this week and report back in the comments about how it goes. And if you want more psychology, what if content that actually helps you understand and improve your mental patterns? Hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started exploring the wild world of human psychology. So here we are, having traveled through this incredible psychology what-if journey together, and I have to ask, how different does your relationship with social media feel right now compared to when we started? Because if you've been following along with this mental health scenario we've explored, something fundamental should have shifted in how you see those little notification badges and heart icons. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've uncovered. We started with a simple question about whether that ping of a like hits harder than a real compliment, and we've ended up dissecting one of the most significant psychological experiments of our time, the mass rewiring of human reward systems through digital validation. We've gone from recognizing the symptoms to understanding the neuroscience, from acknowledging the problem to developing practical solutions. Remember when we talked about Freud's id, ego, and superego at the beginning of this exploration? That wasn't just academic psychology trivia. It was the foundation for understanding how social media platforms have essentially hijacked our most basic psychological drives. Your id still wants instant gratification, your ego still tries to rationalize your behavior, and your superego still judges you based on social expectations. But now you understand how these ancient psychological mechanisms are being manipulated by modern technology. What's remarkable is how this 2025 psychology trend we've been examining connects timeless human nature with cutting-edge neuroscience. The same brain circuits that helped our ancestors survive in small tribal communities are now being activated hundreds of times daily by algorithms designed to maximize engagement. We're still the same humans we were 10,000 years ago, but we're living in a psychological environment that's completely unprecedented in human history. The journey through validation addiction has revealed something profound about human nature itself. We discovered that our need for social approval isn't weakness or vanity, it's a fundamental survival mechanism that kept our species alive for millennia. The problem isn't that we crave validation. It's that we're getting it from sources that can't actually fulfill our deeper psychological needs for genuine connection and belonging. But here's what gives me hope about this whole mind experiment. Awareness is incredibly powerful. Just by understanding these psychological patterns, you've already started to break free from them. Every time you catch yourself mindlessly scrolling for validation, every moment you pause before posting to check your motivations, every instance where you choose authentic engagement over strategic social positioning, you're literally rewiring your brain toward healthier patterns. The research we've explored, from UCLA's social reward studies to Stanford's neuroplasticity findings, all points to the same encouraging conclusion. Change is possible. Your brain isn't permanently trapped in validation-seeking patterns. The same neuroplasticity that allowed social media to rewire your reward circuits can be directed toward developing more sustainable sources of self-worth and connection. I want to share one final anecdote that perfectly captures the absurdity and hope of this whole situation. Last month, I was at dinner with friends, and one person spent literally 10 minutes trying to get the perfect group photo for Instagram. We're talking multiple angles, different lighting, various poses, the full production. Finally, she got the shot, posted it, and immediately started refreshing to see the likes come in. But then something beautiful happened. Another friend gently pointed out that we'd spent more time documenting the dinner than actually enjoying it, and we all just laughed. Not mean laughter, but this shared recognition of how ridiculous our behavior had become. That moment of collective awareness changed the entire dynamic of the evening. We put our phones away and had one of the most genuine, connected conversations I'd experienced in months. No one was performing for social media. No one was thinking about content creation. We were just present with each other. The validation we got from that authentic connection was infinitely more satisfying than any digital approval could ever be. This brings us to the ultimate what-if question that could revolutionize your entire relationship with yourself and others. What if tomorrow you started seeking validation from within? What if your sense of self-worth became based on your own values, experiences, and growth rather than external approval from strangers on the internet? Imagine waking up and checking in with yourself before checking your phone. Picture making decisions based on what genuinely interests or fulfills you rather than what might get good engagement. Envision relationships built on authentic connection rather than social media performance. This isn't just a fantasy, it's entirely achievable once you understand the psychological mechanisms we've explored. The mental health hack we've really been discussing throughout this entire exploration isn't just about social media. It's about reclaiming agency over your own psychological well-being. When you understand that validation addiction is a designed feature, not a personal failing, you can start making conscious choices about how you engage with these systems. We've simulated dystopian validation societies, explored the neuroscience of digital addiction, examined real-world evidence, and developed practical strategies for breaking free. But the most important insight might be this: you have more power than you realize to shape your own psychological experience. The question isn't whether social media will continue to evolve in ways that exploit human psychology. It almost certainly will. The question is whether you'll be a conscious participant who understands the game being played, or an unconscious player who gets played by the game. So here's my challenge for you. Pick the biggest takeaway from this psychology what-if exploration and share it in the comments below. What insight surprised you most? Which mental health hack are you going to try first? And if this deep dive into the psychology of validation addiction has changed how you think about social media, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started exploring the wild, wonderful, and sometimes terrifying world of human psychology. What should we examine next?